This is the Court Leader's Advantage, a podcast series for court professionals and by court professionals. Brought to you by thecourtleader.net and in cooperation with NACM, the National Association for Court Management. Knowing about trauma-informed engagement is increasingly vital for court employees and judges. Many, if not most individuals that courts interact with may have experienced significant trauma in their lives. Many people who encounter the legal system, whether as litigants, witnesses, or defendants, carry the invisible burden of past or ongoing trauma. A trauma-informed approach equips court employees to recognize signs of trauma and respond in ways that minimize re-traumatization. This approach can be doubly important for court staff. Although these engagements are of short duration, they can foster a sense of safety and respect. Individuals can feel heard and supported throughout the judicial process. By understanding how trauma affects behavior, memory, and decision-making, court staff can facilitate more effective communication and reduce potential conflicts and misunderstandings. Understanding trauma engagement also supports the well-being of court employees by providing them with the tools to manage challenging interactions and reduce the risk of secondary traumatic stress. I'm Pete Kiefer, and welcome to the Court Leader's Advantage podcast series. This month, we're discussing trauma-informed engagement and the role it can play in court interactions. What opportunities do courts have to advance this vital theme? Here to discuss trauma-informed engagement are Carrie Summers Nomura, Program Coordinator for the Clackamas County Circuit Court in Oregon City, Oregon; Jill Hawk, Trial Court Administrator for the Superior Court in Cape May and Atlantic Counties, New Jersey; and Trent Baker, Program Coordinator for the Early Childhood Court, Dependency Drug Court, and Juvenile Drug Court for the 17th Judicial District in Fort Lauderdale, Florida. Thank you all for joining today's podcast. Let's start off by asking, why is trauma-informed engagement so important? Why should we be concerned about litigants, families, and witnesses coming to court having experienced trauma? Carrie?
First of all, I love that we're asking this question. This is something, again, I have had a background in nonprofit work and child welfare. I worked in foster care. So I kind of have brought those skills with me. And when I started working at the court, that was one of the immediate things that I noticed. And not to be offensive to our court, it's just, I think the judicial system itself is sort of geared to not really be trauma informed. And so I love that we're pushing pushing the needle a little bit to recognize that it would benefit everyone if we did. One of the things that I love to start with is that everyone has experienced some level of trauma, even if you've had a very privileged life and aren't maybe from a marginalized community. I think one of the things that we get stuck in is thinking that trauma is something, like complex trauma where, people have, maybe grown up in domestic violent sort of families, and maybe somebody's been incarcerated in their family, maybe there has just been continuous violence. There are other forms of trauma too. So I encourage folks to not always be thinking about the really extreme things. Even going through a divorce in the family can be very, very traumatic. So I like to think of trauma as being a wound and something that we can sort of, remedy in the process of how we're caring for the customers that we serve. The impact of trauma can manifest in really odd ways. You never know how someone's going to react. Some people will freeze. That fight or freeze sort of scenario comes into play. Some people get very angry. Some people retract and, kind of, curl up in a little ball, trying to become safe. So if you think of, like, I think of things like, maybe a litigant coming for a DR case and is, in the courtroom with maybe an abuser, and, the smell of his aftershave can be triggering for people. Having worked in foster care, I saw this all the time where kids would just withdraw and we wouldn't know necessarily what was going on, but taking the steps to kind of find out what was going on and really sort of unpacking what it was that was really upsetting them was always really beneficial. And so here we are in a court of law, all of us, and the law is so static, but I think it's really important that to recognize that our treatment of customers and even our coworkers can be more flexible, and we can take the time to sort of recognize if someone's having a really hard time. So some of the traumatic stress responses that we see in the court are folks that are like intensely sort of reactive, like their emotions are kind of all over the map, and we kind of go, "What's going on?" Instead of just thinking, "Oh, maybe they're doing drugs," right? Or they have some kind of an addiction problem. If you think about disassociation, or even just distrust, I think that's a really big one with the judicial system, is that no one, if you're in some kind of acute mental illness condition, it's very difficult for you to sort of trust a government, basically. I mean, that's really what we're not saying, but probably should be said. And then lastly, I'd like to just sort of bring up that, I am really fascinated with brain studies and folks that have experienced some level of trauma. I mean, it can affect your brain science. So, brain makeup. So trauma can lead to the impact of, cognitive functioning, and really mess with that frontal lobe. So, there can be really dramatic results as a result of trauma that we need to start addressing more as a court. Trauma can lead to legal involvement. Of course, we see that. If you're reacting, let's say, something triggers you, you're out in the public and you get in a fight with someone. That's definitely something. The court process itself can be very traumatic. Even if we have the best customer service, simply being here can be very, very difficult for folks. And then, lastly, court professionals often are really dealing with that secondary trauma. We never know how one staff member will react to a case, based upon, compared to another staff member. So we need to really, I believe, up our game, as a nation, really, of really incorporating more of this work into the courts.
Jill?
I really liked Carrie's description that, trauma is a wound and it's not always something so extreme as, abuse, neglect, violence. It could be a myriad of things. But all of those things do shape and, affect how individuals perceive the courts and how they interact with our court staff. So just court staff, being aware, I always tell court staff, don't take it personal. Whatever this interaction you're having with this person, they don't personally know you, so you can't take it personal. So just keep in mind that they may have some of these wounds, and that's why they're, very upset, or they're, could be using inappropriate language at the window. But we definitely do have to use trauma-informed engagement, just to promote trust between court users and the judiciary. It helps us recognize their reality and avoid re-traumatizing these individuals and creating a safe, supportive environment. And I just usually do this just by, you know, talking to people like they are people, introducing myself, asking what their name is, how would they like to me, how would they like me to refer to them? Just creating a rapport and just being open, and listening and letting them vent sometimes. And possibly providing some accommodations for people to feel more comfortable if they do appear to be, suffering from some of those wounds.
So what strategies can we use to recognize and respond to signs of trauma in individuals without re-traumatizing them? Jill?
So some signs to look for, could be hypervigilance. That's someone that's almost looking around all the time, expecting something bad to happen. An exaggerated startle response when, there's any kind of sound and the person kind of jumps out of their skin. If, the person just seems extremely uncomfortable being in the courthouse, which I know being in the courthouse provokes anxiety itself, but if the person just seems overly so, avoiding eye contact, seeming withdrawn, if the person's having an outburst. And the way I interact with someone that, may have this wound, is just to ask, open-ended, neutral questions. I simplify everything. I simplify even introducing myself. I'm just, hi, my name is Jill. I'm a supervisor here. Can you tell me what's going on? I will provide the person absolutely my last name, but just, look, I'm Jill, and what would you like me to call you? And then everybody knows what a supervisor does, but not everybody knows what a trial court administrator is or a division manager. So just keep it simple. I always invite the person to share with me what might be going on rather than saying, like, why do you feel that way? That doesn't really give them a choice of answering or not. And I liked what Trent said about empowering the person. So I always say, you seem really upset about having to come to the courthouse. Like, do you mind sharing with me, why you feel that way? Or, can you tell me why? Because some people will say, no, I don't want to come and I'm not telling you. And of course, I'll still explore that as well. But the person does have the right to not disclose, their business to me. But, it may lead to the person saying, I don't like sitting in the courtroom all day because then I have to hear about all the other, say, domestic violence cases. And I don't like hearing that. And that can prompt, court staff to offer an accommodation. Like, well, what if we give you a set time, so your court hearing will definitely just be at 10:30 and you'll walk right into the courtroom and it will be your case and then you leave right after. Or what if we provide you a conference room to wait in until your case is ready and then, you only have to, to handle your case that day. Or you can ask the person what their idea would be for what would make them feel more comfortable. It might just be, well, can I bring my friend Sally? She won't say anything, but I feel more comfortable with her. Sometimes court users don't know that that is an option for them. So, I always also try to ask the person, you know, what do you suggest we do, to help you feel more comfortable, to help you, get to court on this date?
Trent?
I think one of the biggest fears is the fear of the unknown. And as you were saying, Jill, the parents are so anxious about this process, or the individual is so anxious about the process and doesn't know what to expect next. And so and it takes a while for that trust to be built. So we try to be as transparent as possible and we try to explain the process. Our team, I feel like every other sentence has about four acronyms in it that we use, and I even struggle with what does this mean again? So we have to be a little bit more cognizant of that. Um, but yeah, we'll talk about like here's what to expect, and again, I like analogy, so I'll say we all have an invisible backpack, and in that is stuff, and that stuff is unresolved trauma and it gets heavy. And through this process, the parent will be working on court-ordered case plan tasks that are evidence-based. So, they're shown to work. And it'll take time, but they'll learn more tools. And there's that invisible toolkit that will start filling up, and then they can start getting rid of that weight in the backpack. And to try to kind of break it down in similar or smaller steps. Um, and I think wording is something that, and it's evolved even the past few years that, the words that we use can re-traumatize certain people. So, for example, we had like a father that was using substances for about 10 years. And then in coming into our court, he was introduced to sobriety and was testing negative. And upon he returned to using substances. And in the courtroom, instead of saying what used to have been said was, oh, he tested dirty. Those are words we try not to use. We try to say, negative or positive.
Mm.
Um, and although he may be someone that's suffering from an addiction, we don't want to call him an addict. So it's a person in recovery, and those little words can make a difference.
Are there formal programs that courts can sign up for that will educate staff in trauma-informed engagement strategies? Trent?
Yes, I think on a larger level, like on a nationwide level, um, th there's safe with early childhood court. Um, there's the National Resource Agency 0 to 3, and they can offer training and guidance. On the state level here in Florida, there's the Florida Association of Infant Mental Health. And then in Florida, we also have approved best practice standards for early childhood court. So our state office has a lot of resources about training. And then on the local level, there's like our Children's Services Council. They'll send out emails throughout the month, and there's trainings that will involve anything to do with being more trauma informed. And with drug court, on the national level, there's All Rise organization, and they have their national best practice standards, and Florida has theirs. So th those are two resources as well. And something that was unique that our Unified Family Court administrative judge did was she coordinated a trauma assessment that was done on our dependency division here at the courthouse, and it was done by I'm sorry, NCJ, FCJ, so the National Council of Juvenile and Family Court Judges. And it was like a 3-day site visit where they came in and did a lot of observing waiting rooms, courtrooms, walking through security, and then the interactions within those rooms, and what's the temperature like, what's the noise level like, and then interviewed stakeholders as well, and then they pulled together strengths and things that the division could work on. So that offered some great feedback.
Jill?
So some state courts now have a contract with LinkedIn Learning. So if your court does, there are several courses available. I'm just going to read a couple of them. Trauma-informed design. There's another one, trauma-informed change management. Become a trauma-informed leader. Navigating personal trauma and triggers at work. So full disclosure, I have not taken these, but most LinkedIn learnings, do seem to be of higher caliber. Also, if your court has a contract with an EAP provider, I know they will usually provide training on, things like burnout, compassion fatigue, and trauma-informed engagement. So we usually do locally provide something along those lines for our probation officers once or twice a year.
How can this training support professionals in managing their own emotional responses while engaging with individuals with trauma? Carrie?
Um, I think that one of the first things that we need to do as a court system is to normalize that there is this secondhand sort of carryover and trauma for staff that are serving the public that may have a variety of things going on, including trauma. One of the things that I have so valued in starting with the court system is recognizing that the people who work here are really invested in the work that they do. And I really respect that. But I also think that within that, I think we would do a better job if we were to incorporate more trauma-informed learnings with our courts. And I think it also really starts with leadership. I mean, I think it's kind of that trickle down sort of philosophy that if you see your, supervisor working their tail off, working, a lot of overtime and this and that, I think it's di more difficult for staff to say, hey, I'd like to have a personal day off, or, I need a mental health day. So I think normalizing it and saying and encouraging staff, hey, take it, I know the state of Oregon gives us a couple personal days, every year. Um, and then definitely continuing education. I think that there's a lot of people that are just really just don't know about trauma, and maybe, they don't think that they've really experienced any trauma. So it's difficult for them to understand sort of what's going on. We want to equip staff to recognize that they're experiencing secondhand trauma and give them some concrete tools to sort of, be able to return to work. If they've just gone through like a sexual abuse case or something of that nature. We have had staff who have really, it's hit them a lot harder than other staff. And so one of the things we do here at our court is I have created a resource list of different resources they can take advantage. I think Jill mentioned the EAP program. We use Canopy here in Oregon. And that's a great resource. There's, 5 free sessions of counseling that you can do per event. But common symptoms, of sort of that secondary trauma, chronic fatigue, even absenteeism. So if somebody is consistently like every week calling in sick, and maybe you don't know what's going on, that sort of solicits a little conversation with maybe a supervisor or manager to find out if they're okay. It can also be physical illness. We keep hearing stress can cause this physical illness and it manifests in a lot of different ways. Um, but ultimately, the consequences of not moving in this direction are great. We are not best serving our customers, number one. It can also lead to a lot of turnover and just simple burnout from, our staff. So, the other thing I just wanted to mention is in doing this and trying to really recognize sort of the impact it has on staff members, I think it's really powerful for anyone who hasn't heard of the ACEs test, the Adverse Childhood Experiences research that was done back in the 90s by Kaiser, and I think the CDC was also involved. And I mean, it was a good marker, and there are still tests available.
Yeah.
But I think it's always a really good check-in for people, like people who really go, well, I had, a fine upbringing. I don't think I've experienced any trauma. But then when they go through the series of questions, it's like, oh, maybe this is impacting me. And, the research shows that if you've had, a fairly high ACEs score, that you're more likely to have had a little bit rougher childhood. And unfortunately, those things carry over into adulthood if they're not dealt with. So I really encourage folks to, sort of invest in their own discovering their own trauma so that we can best serve the public. Um, and then sort of the last thing is like some of the things that we've done here. I think I've mentioned this before, but we do chair massage quarterly for our staff. We also have started doing chair massage sessions that are just, at your desk, and it's, we kind of go through it together. I think, as silly as this sounds and as trite as this sounds, encourage some physical activity. It's a beautiful sunny day here in Portland, Oregon. It's freezing, but it's sunny. So if you stay in the sun, encourage folks to go outside, take a walk, go get some coffee. And then destigmatize those mental health days. If someone needs some time, let them have it. Our new court is going to have, sort of a wellness room where, folks can just kind of come in and just sort of take a break.
Jill?
So training is definitely very key in this area. Staff need to be taught to be mindful of their own reactions to, disclosures of trauma. They should avoid expressing shock, pity, discomfort, because this is definitely going to make the person feel, perhaps ashamed. Definitely help staff identify situations that may evoke these strong reactions from court users, but also encourage staff to take a moment for themselves, if they need it. I mean, I always tell staff if it's 3:30 and you've been at the window all day and 9 out of 10 court users have been more on the difficult side, and number 10 comes up, go get someone else and say, can you please help me? I can't, my cup hath run over. I can't, I just need a break. And that is okay. But as leaders, we need to communicate that to staff and tell them that it's okay for them to tap out sometimes. Definitely teach strategies to remain calm and focused during high stress interactions. Don't add to the situation. Definitely try to de-escalate, because we really can set the tone of a conversation and make it, bring it down a notch. I'm a very loud talker, but I'm a very fast talker. But I magically, for some reason, when interacting with people, talk a lot lower and a lot slower. And it definitely does, make that person just model your behavior. It's just natural to do that. And again, I can't stress the importance of EAP for staff. I mean, we, stress that with our staff a lot, and we just try to encourage, if anybody's experienced any secondary trauma or burnout, you always have to take care of yourself first.
What advice do you have for courts that are considering adopting trauma-informed engagement training? Trent?
Advice would be time. It takes time. We've talked about all these trainings, and we want to then use our relationships with providers that we work with in different agencies and stakeholders of what is it that they want out of this as well. And that takes time, that relationship building. And then once you feel like you might be there, like, okay, I think we're pretty trauma responsive. It doesn't end there, it's ongoing. Um, and being trauma responsive takes more time. So if I were to grab a new case and say with the four of us, hey, can I read the shelter order? Do y'all have any feedback on what do you think we should do? That that's just the four of us talking, giving advice, probably more cut and dry. But if it's being trauma responsive and there's a family that's with us and also their attorney and other parties to the case, um, it takes more time. The parents may need to tell a story about something that's in that shelter order that then leads to, okay, we know somewhere that can help with this, and here's a referral, and then after the meeting, it leads to this. So it all takes more time. Well worth it, but it does take more time. And like Jill said, there's a level of you can only take so much. If you have, even great meetings, if you have a few of them back to back, you may kind of need to take that break. And I would say other advice would be from like a leadership standpoint that supervisors can think of kind of incorporating more of of a reflective style um, in their supervision, because some of the staff will be kind of absorbing that secondary trauma. Something that Florida has done is the state office has contracted with a psychologist, and monthly there's reflective sessions, and so each of our specialty courts throughout the state can kind of sign on, and for that hour really discuss anything. It could be we're having challenges of breaking through with a parent, and other attorneys may chime in and say, here's what we've done. Or it could be just discussing certain frustrations. In the age of kind of fentanyl, we've lost a lot of parents to fatal overdoses. And for those team members that directly work with the parent and spoke to them every day, it takes a toll. And so, carving that time out for self-care in those sessions is important to continue the great work that we do.
Jill?
My advice would be one training is not going to do it. Staff have to experience several different types of training. Definitely try to incorporate role playing, even if you have staff say watch a training, just do it afterwards. But also recognize that this is not in everyone's wheelhouse. I mean, some people have a natural knack for like the gift of gab, I say. So if you have, some employees that this really just makes them feel uncomfortable and they're not good at it, don't put them at the window. That's okay. I'm sure they're great at something else. And do they have to be able to interact with people? Of course. But you have to give them the ability to, if they're, up at the window, to say, you know what, Mrs. Smith, like, do you mind if I get Jill to talk to you about this? Like, she's really the expert in this area. And not criticize, the person for doing that. Because there's some people this just comes naturally to. You can train some people to do it, and then other people they just it just makes them uncomfortable. So I think as leaders we have to permit staff to be themselves and to make them feel comfortable enough to say like, this, I really have trouble doing this, Jill, like, can someone else, do this? Is that okay? And it's like, yeah, that's fine. Like, you're great at Excel spreadsheets, you could do that instead. We do have to be cognizant of that. Definitely, this is a lifelong training skill. It's not going to be taught with one session. And another thing I always look back in interactions that were tough is almost doing like a Monday morning quarterback. Like, what could I have done different? Like, what could I have done better? What did I do right? What did I do wrong? So just encouraging staff to do that as well. Like, hey, when you have a difficult interaction, why don't you come talk to me about it afterwards and we'll kind of like, debrief it together and I can give you some feedback about it.
Carrie?
I love what you were saying, Jill, about some people just not having that skill set, and that's okay. Again, I think this, I've seen this manifest in a lot of different ways where, I've tried to when I hold a meeting, like do check-ins at the beginning, and some of our staff are like, I'm uncomfortable. And it's a silly question, like, what's your favorite color? Or where would you like to be right now? And so recognizing that, and again, another form of being trauma informed is recognizing that this might just be like the worst possible thing for your staff member to like be basically performing and doing something that is not in their wheelhouse. So we've even talked at our court about partnering with our behavioral health unit in the local police department to like train a group of people that could be called upon. So let's say we have someone at the window that is definitely having a mental health crisis. Folks aren't really sure what to do, what the next step is. We don't want to call a deputy because that will, of course, escalate things. So what can we do instead? And so we were talking about having this skill set of, maybe 10 people in our court, 10% of our court that can be called upon to sort of respond because, that's probably more realistic than having everyone on the court trained and some of which trained in a way that they're going to be very uncomfortable to use. The only other thing that I would really encourage, in addition to everyone saying training, is that this is a cultural change. I think that's really important to recognize. And so, as Jill and Trent both said, this is not a one-day training. It's a cultural change of really going from we're here, we're good worker bees, we're going to do, what we need to do, and we can't deal with how you're feeling about it. And that's not to be trite or make fun of the judicial system. It's just that's kind of the way it's been. And so we need to recognize that along the way, it's going to take time, just like Trent said, it's going to take time for us to sort of adapt to this new model of really recognizing that there are a lot of people living with trauma, both within our court and people who are coming to our court. And, we see the statistics coming out of jails that a vast majority of people who are in our jails are dealing with some kind of mental health crisis. So the time is right, I guess, is my message.
I want to thank Carrie, Jill, and Trent for their advice for court employees now and their vision for the future of informed engagement involving trauma. This is an important theme, and we will hear more about this in the years to come. As always, my thanks to you court professionals tuning into today's episode. Whether dealing with litigants in crisis or co-workers under stress, You handle every challenge with calm and good judgment. Thank you. Join us on Tuesday, March 18th for another episode dealing with the issues facing our courts. This has been the Court Leaders Advantage podcast series. I'm Pete Kiefer, and thanks for joining us today. Thanks for joining us today. The Court Leaders Advantage is a regular podcast series on courts and court administration. Today's episode will be available on our website, on the Court Leader website, on YouTube, Facebook, iTunes, LinkedIn, and on X, formerly known as Twitter. Become part of the conversation. If you have questions, comments, or ideas for future episodes, email us. Our address is podcasts@nacomnet.org. Did you hear an interesting comment by one of the panelists that you would like to listen to again, but you don't want to search the entire episode to find it? The additional resources section of the webpage has a question time marker sheet. Find the discussion question on the sheet, and next to it is the time that question was asked. You can quickly fast forward to that time and listen to the panelists' comments. Remember, if you don't have time to watch an episode, you can always listen to the audio version. Listen in your car or on the bus on your way to or from work. You never have to miss an episode. I'm Pete Kiefer, and on behalf of our guests, the Court Leader website, and the National Association for Court Management, thank you, and have a great day. The views, information, and opinions expressed during this episode are solely those of the host and the individual presenters. They do not necessarily represent the position of the National Association for Court Management.